The transport ship Nexus Dawn hummed through the void between star systems, carrying its precious cargo of young beings from dozens of species toward the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy. The Galactic Defense Institute had stood for over 3 centuries as the ultimate proving ground for future commanders, tacticians, and peacekeepers. Only the best and from each world earned a place within its halls. Sat quietly in the corner of the common area, watching his fellow cadets interact. At 19, he was average height for a human, with dark hair and calm brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. While the other species formed their natural groups, he remained alone, not by choice, but because the others weren't quite sure what to make of him. They clustered together, their blue-scaled faces animated as they discussed theoretical battle formations. Their species had ruled space combat for generations, and they carried themselves with the confidence of natural pilots. Near the viewing ports, a group of engineers examined the ship's systems, their 4 arms working in perfect coordination as they analyzed data streams on their personal devices. The delegates clicked and chittered in their complex language, occasionally breaking into standard galactic to include others in their conversation. But it was the who dominated the space both physically and socially. Standing nearly 8 feet tall even in their relaxed posture, the reptilian warriors commanded respect through sheer presence. Their leader, a young male named, possessed the deep emerald scales that marked him as nobility among his people. His followers hung on his every word as he regaled them with tales of conquest from his. They have led the Galactic Defense Forces in every major conflict for the past 2 centuries, declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. When the Void Reapers attacked the outer colonies, it was ships that broke their fleets. When the crystal entities tried to consume the Andromeda relay stations, ground forces held the line. A young named looked up from her study group. What about the human contributions? Earth forces participated in both conflicts. The common area fell silent. Even the stopped their constant chittering. All eyes turned toward, who continued reading his tactical manual without looking up. His laugh was like grinding stone. Humans, they showed up late to both wars after the real fighting was done. Support roles mostly, supply runs and cleanup duty. He gestured dismissively toward. No offense intended, but your species lacks the physical capabilities for serious military action. Admirable persistence, certainly, but hardly warrior material. Finally looked up from his book, meeting's gaze with quiet eyes. None taken, everyone has their strengths. Exactly my point, continued, warming to his subject. The Academy understands this, which is why they assign roles based on species capabilities, command combat operations, handle fleet coordination, maintain technological systems, manage communications networks. He paused, tilting his massive head. I'm curious what role they have planned for humanity. Probably logistics, suggested a from the engineering group. Humans show aptitude for organizational tasks. Or diplomacy, added. They seem good at mediation. Closed his book and stood, stretching slightly. I suppose we'll find out soon enough. He moved toward the observation deck where he could watch the stars in peace. Behind him, the conversation gradually returned to normal, though he caught fragments of continued speculation about human capabilities. Most of it was condescending, though not maliciously so. The other species simply couldn't understand what humans brought to an organization built around military prowess. 3 days later, the Nexus Dawn dropped out of hyperspace near Station, home to the Galactic Defense Institute. The massive structure hung in orbit around a gas giant, its gleaming spires and training facilities sprawling across multiple interconnected platforms. Docking bays large enough to hold battleships dotted the station's surface, while smaller craft moved in precise patterns around the exterior. The new cadets gathered in the main briefing amphitheater, a cavernous space that could hold representatives from every member species of the Galactic Alliance. Admiral, a distinguished with silver-edged scales, stood at the central podium. His uniform bore the insignia of countless campaigns, and his presence commanded immediate attention. Welcome to the Galactic Defense Institute, he began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. You represent the finest young minds and strongest warriors from across the galaxy. Over the next 4 years, you will be forged into the leaders who will protect civilization itself. Listened as the Admiral outlined the Academy's structure. Academic courses would cover everything from xenobiology to hyperspace navigation. Physical training would push every species to their limits and beyond. Most importantly, tactical simulations would test their ability to think under pressure, make difficult decisions, and lead others in crisis situations. "Your first assessment begins immediately," Admiral announced. "You will be divided into mixed species squads and given a series of challenges designed to evaluate your individual capabilities and team dynamics. These tests will determine your academic tracks and leadership potential." Found himself assigned to Squad 7, along with two twins named Mesh and Nexus, and a communications specialist called 9 Clicks. The immediately assumed command, which the others accepted without question, even offered no objection, content to observe how the group functioned. Their first challenge took place in the Academy's legendary obstacle course, a sprawling complex that could be reconfigured to simulate any environment. Today it resembled an urban warfare zone, complete with rubble-strewn streets, partially collapsed buildings, and hidden defensive positions. "Objective is simple," announced their instructor, a battle-scarred named Chief. "Navigate the course, neutralize all hostile targets, and secure the extraction point. Time limit is 30 minutes. You'll face both automated defenses and live opposition from senior cadets. Questions." Stepped forward, rules of engagement. Stun weapons only. Your equipment will register hits and disable affected individuals for the remainder of the exercise. Protective gear will prevent actual injury, but the pain is real enough to teach proper caution. The squad gathered around a tactical display showing the course layout, quickly outlined his strategy, assigning roles based on each species' assumed capabilities. They would handle technical challenges and equipment maintenance, would coordinate with other squads if they encountered them. 9 Clicks would manage communications and provide overwatch. Would. Supply and logistics support, decided. Stay behind the main force, carry extra equipment, provide ammunition as needed. Nodded without comment, though shot him a sympathetic look. They had begun to suspect there was more to the quiet human than is realized. They entered the course in standard formation, with leading and the others arranged according to their assigned roles. Brought up the rear, carrying the squad's backup power cells and medical supplies. They set an aggressive pace, charging through the first series of obstacles with typical directness. The strategy worked well initially. Size and strength allowed him to breach barriers that would have stopped smaller species. Mesh and Nexus disabled several automated turrets with practiced efficiency. 9 Clicks spotted hidden cameras and redirected them away from the squad's position, coordinated their movement with mathematical precision. But 15 minutes into the exercise, they encountered their first serious opposition. A squad of senior cadets had established a defensive position in a partially destroyed building, with overlapping fields of fire covering the only apparent route forward. Energy bolts crackled through the air as soon as Squad 7 came into view, forcing them to take cover behind scattered debris. Frontal assault, decided immediately. Provide suppressing fire. Calculate optimal approach vectors. 9 Clicks maintain communications. Human, stay low and be ready to treat casualties. The plan was classically direct, aggressive, and relying on superior firepower to overwhelm the enemy. Under normal circumstances, it might have worked. The senior cadets weren't expecting such a direct approach, and natural armor allowed him to absorb several hits while closing distance. But the defenders had set up their position well. Crossfire from multiple angles caught the charging in a deadly web of energy blasts. His equipment registered multiple lethal hits, and the simulation system locked his weapon and movement controls. He was officially dead. With their leader down and facing increasing pressure from the entrenched defenders, Squad 7 found themselves pinned down with no clear path forward. Mesh and Nexus were running low on power cells. 9 Clicks couldn't establish communication with other squads through the interference. Calculations showed no viable assault routes that wouldn't result in total squad elimination. "We need to fall back," she announced over the squad channel. "Regroup and find another route." "Negative," came Chief's voice over the general frequency. "No retreat allowed in this scenario. Find a way forward or fail the exercise." The squad huddled behind their inadequate cover as energy bolts continued to rain down around them. Time was running out, and none of their conventional tactics were working. The senior cadets had chosen their position too well, and Squad 7 lacked the firepower to dislodge them through direct assault. That's when finally spoke up Mind if I make a suggestion? His voice was calm, almost casual, despite the simulated combat raging around them. Looked at him hopefully. Anything, we're running out of options. Studied the tactical display on his portable unit, noting the positions of enemies, obstacles, and potential cover. His expression remained relaxed, as if he were solving a particularly interesting puzzle rather than facing a tactical crisis. The problem isn't their position, he said quietly. It's that we're thinking like soldiers instead of thinking like the enemy. They expect us to act according to our species' normal patterns. 9 Clicks chittered nervously. Explain. Charge straight ahead because they're strong enough to break through most defenses. Rely on technology to solve problems. Calculate optimal solutions. Coordinate group actions. Gestured toward the defensive position. But what do humans do? The squad looked at him blankly. They honestly had no idea what combat doctrine humans followed, because Earth species wasn't known for military prowess. Smiled, and for the first time since entering the academy, his expression held something that might have been anticipation. We cheat. Over the next several minutes, outlined a plan that made no sense according to conventional military doctrine. It violated standard tactical principles, ignored established engagement protocols, and relied on misdirection rather than firepower. The other squad members listened with growing amazement as the quiet human demonstrated a completely different way of thinking about combat. That's paused running calculations. That's either brilliant or completely insane. Both, agreed cheerfully. It's also our only option if we want to complete this exercise. 9Clicks' translator crackled as he processed rapid emotional shifts. But the risks are acceptable compared to certain failure, finished. Besides, the worst that happens is we get stunned. The best outcome is we learn something new about unconventional warfare. The squad exchanged glances. They were cadets at the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy, surrounded by centuries of established tactical doctrine and proven strategies. Everything in their training told them to stick to known methods and reliable techniques. But they were also facing failure with conventional approaches, and the strange human's alternative offered at least a chance of success. All right, decided for the group, we try it your way. Nodded and began distributing equipment in ways that standard protocols. Instead of each species sticking to their traditional roles, he cross-trained them on unfamiliar systems and weapons. Rather than advancing according to established formation patterns, he outlined movement sequences that seemed random but actually exploited specific blind spots in the defensive position. Most importantly, he explained how they would use the senior cadets' own assumptions against them. They're expecting us to act like our species normally acts, said as he made final preparations. So we act like different species entirely. You're going to move like a 9Clicks, you're going to think like a mesh and nexus, tactical coordination like. And what will you do? 9Clicks asked. Checked his weapon settings one final time, his expression still calm but now holding an edge of something darker. I'm going to move like a human, which means I'm going to do things they've never seen before and won't know how to counter. The assault began exactly as the defenders expected. Energy fire erupted from Squad 7's position as they attempted another frontal assault. The senior cadets settled into their prepared positions, ready to repel the same kind of attack they'd already defeated once. But this time, something was different. Instead of the predictable species-based tactics, the attacking cadets moved in patterns that made no sense. The charged forward like a warrior, drawing fire and attention. The provided technical support like an engineer. The twins coordinated like a hive mind. And the humans simply disappeared. None of the defenders noticed when separated from his squad during the initial chaos. Their sensors were focused on the main assault, tracking known energy signatures and movement patterns. They had no baseline for human stealth techniques because Earth species wasn't considered capable of serious infiltration. That oversight proved costly. While he maintained the defenders' attention with their unorthodox assault, worked his way through sections of the course that weren't being watched. He moved like smoke through the rubble, using every piece of cover and concealment the environment offered. His path took him far outside the normal engagement zone, through areas considered impassable or irrelevant to the objective. 15 minutes after the assault began, materialized behind the senior cadet's position like a ghost made solid. The first defender he encountered never knew what hit him. One moment the senior cadet was focusing his fire on the frontal assault. The next, his equipment registered a point-blank stun blast and shut down completely. Was already moving before the body hit the ground. The second defender noticed his partner's collapse and turned to investigate. He found his weapon pressed against his helmet and his own systems powering down before he could raise an alarm. By the time the remaining defenders realized they were under attack from behind, half their position was compromised. They tried to turn their weapons around, but had already relocated to a new firing position. He moved through their defenses like liquid shadow, appearing long enough to eliminate a target before vanishing again into the maze of rubble and debris. The senior cadets were experienced fighters with years of training, but they'd never encountered anything like this. Their formations were designed to repel frontal assaults or flanking maneuvers, not to handle an infiltrator who seemed to exist outside normal tactical parameters. Within minutes, the entire defensive position was neutralized. Squad 7's frontal assault team found themselves facing empty positions and stunned opponents who couldn't explain what had happened. Chief's voice crackled over the communications channel. Exercise complete. All squads returned to briefing positions for assessment. As they gathered their equipment, approached with an expression of amazement mixed with curiosity. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" she asked. "That wasn't anything they teach in standard military doctrine." Shouldered his pack and checked his weapon settings. "It's not military doctrine at all, it's just how humans hunt." Hunt, 9-Clicks's translator, struggled with the concept. "You mean like gathering food?" "Among other things," replied quietly. "Humans are persistence predators. We're not the strongest or fastest species on our world, so we developed other advantages. Patience, adaptability, the ability to think differently than our prey expects." Who had been revived after his simulated death, studied the human with new interest. "And you consider your enemies to be prey?" Met this gaze with those same calm brown eyes, but now there was something else behind them. Something that made even the massive reptilian warrior feel a momentary chill. "Only when they threaten something I'm protecting." The squad made their way back to the briefing area in thoughtful silence. Each of them was beginning to realize that their assumptions about human capabilities might have been seriously flawed, but none of them yet understood the full implications of what they'd witnessed. That would come later, when the galaxy faced its first real test since humanity joined the Galactic Alliance. For now, was content to return to his role as the quiet student in the corner, watching and learning while his classmates continued to underestimate what humans could do when properly motivated. But Chief, monitoring the exercise from the control room, made careful notes in his file. They had seen enough combat to recognize a natural predator when he encountered one, regardless of species designation. The Academy's instructors would need to be warned that their human student was far more dangerous than anyone had assumed. Not because he was violent or unstable, but because he possessed capabilities that conventional understanding of human limitations. In a galaxy where military doctrine was based on predictable species traits, represented something entirely new. A human warrior who fought according to no established pattern, followed no known protocols, and achieved objectives through methods that shouldn't have been possible. The real question was whether the Academy was prepared to handle students whose capabilities transcended traditional classifications, and whether the galaxy itself was ready for what humans might become when given proper training and motivation. The transport ship continued its journey toward station, carrying its cargo of future leaders toward their destinies. But now the balance of power among the cadets had shifted in ways that none of them fully understood. The quiet human in the corner was no longer quite so easy to dismiss. The Academy's reputation for challenging its students was legendary throughout the galaxy, but even veterans like Chief admitted that the current crop of first-year cadets was exceptional. Word of Squad 7's unorthodox victory in the urban warfare simulation had spread through the instructor ranks, generating considerable debate about teaching methods and species-based assumptions. Continued his studies with the same quiet intensity he'd shown since arriving, but his now watched him with different eyes. The casual dismissal of human capabilities had been replaced by wary respect, though none of them were quite sure how to process what they'd witnessed. 3 weeks into the academic term, Admiral announced the next major evaluation. a comprehensive strategic simulation that would test not just individual skills, but the cadets' ability to function as integrated command teams. The exercise would pit squads against each other in a series of escalating scenarios, with the losing teams facing academic probation and possible dismissal. This simulation will determine your class rankings for the remainder of your first year, the Admiral explained to the assembled cadets. More importantly, it will identify those individuals with genuine command potential versus those better suited for specialist roles. The announcement created immediate tension among the squads. Everyone knew that first-year rankings often determined career paths within the Galactic Defense Forces. High performers received choice assignments and advanced training opportunities. Poor performers found themselves relegated to support positions with limited advancement potential. Squad 7 gathered in their assigned study area that evening to prepare for the coming challenge. The space was typical academy design. Functional furniture arranged around a central holographic projector, with individual workstations equipped for each species' specific needs. Reference materials covered every aspect of galactic military history, tactical theory, and xenobiology. The key advantage will be information, announced, pulling up strategic databases on her workstation. Tactical doctrine emphasizes superior intelligence gathering as the foundation for all successful operations. Mesh and Nexus worked in their characteristic synchronized pattern, analyzing technical specifications for the simulation systems. Methodology suggests focusing on technological solutions, Mesh observed. Control the battlefield systems, control the outcome. 9-Clicks chittered agreement while accessing communication protocols. Coordination principles mandate establishing reliable information networks between all participants. Isolated units cannot achieve complex objectives. Studied historical battle records with the intensity of someone whose species had built their reputation on military excellence. Experience shows that decisive action trumps elaborate planning. Strike hard, strike fast, achieve victory through superior force application. Listen to each perspective while reading through human military history on his personal device. Earth's relatively recent addition to the Galactic Alliance meant that human tactical doctrine wasn't included in standard academy databases. He had to rely on files downloaded from his home system before departure. "What's your species' approach?" asked eventually. "You demonstrated some interesting capabilities in the last exercise." Looked up from accounts of ancient Earth conflicts. The Mongol invasions, Roman campaigns, World War II's Pacific Theater, asymmetric conflicts in Afghanistan and Vietnam. Humans had been fighting each other before encountering alien species, and that experience had generated tactics unlike anything else in the galaxy. "Human doctrine is adaptive," he said carefully. "We tend to study our opponents and develop counters specific to their capabilities and expectations." "Meaning," 9-Clicks prompted. "Meaning we don't have a standard approach. We use whatever works against the particular enemy we're facing." The others exchanged glances. Military doctrine throughout the galaxy was based on species-specific strengths and established patterns. Charged forward, calculated optimal solutions, relied on technological advantages, coordinated group efforts. Each species had developed tactics that maximized their natural abilities. But humans apparently did something different entirely. "That seems inefficient," observed. "How do you train standardized forces if tactics vary by situation?" Consider the question. We train adaptability itself, learning to observe, analyze, and respond to unexpected situations. Then we practice switching between different tactical approaches until it becomes instinctive. "But what if your opponents are familiar with these various approaches?" Mesh asked. "Known tactics can be countered." "Then we invent new ones." The simplicity of the statement somehow made it more unsettling. The other species had spent thousands of years refining their military doctrines into highly effective systems. The idea that someone might simply discard proven methods in favor of experimental approaches seemed almost reckless. But performance in the urban warfare simulation suggested that human adaptability might be more effective than anyone had expected. Over the next few days, Squad 7 prepared intensively for the strategic simulation. Each member contributed their species' traditional strengths: mathematical analysis, technological insight, communication coordination, and tactical aggression. provided what he called alternative perspectives on conventional approaches. The exercise began with all squads assembled in the Academy's main simulation chamber, a vast spherical room lined with holographic projectors capable of creating any environment. Today it displayed a star map showing a disputed system with 3 inhabited worlds, multiple space stations, and competing claims from different galactic powers. "Your mission is to resolve the sector crisis," Admiral announced. 6 major powers are on the verge of open warfare over mining rights, territorial claims, and trade route access. The Galactic Council has authorized military intervention to prevent regional destabilization. The scenario was based on actual historical events, though the cadets wouldn't learn that until much later. Real commanders had faced similar challenges, and their decisions had shaped galactic politics for generations. Now the Academy's students would discover whether they possessed the wisdom and skill to handle such complex situations. Each squad was assigned to represent one of the major powers, with specific objectives and constraints. Squad 7 found themselves commanding the Neutral Mediation Force, tasked with preventing warfare while protecting civilian populations and maintaining interstellar commerce. "Interesting assignment," mused as they reviewed their briefing materials. "We can't achieve victory through conquest, but we also can't allow any faction to dominate the region." "Classic peacekeeping scenario," agreed. "Success requires balancing competing interests while maintaining military credibility." Studied the scenario parameters with growing interest. The other squads had been assigned roles that played to their species' natural strengths. Squad 3, led by cadets, commanded the main battle fleet. Squad 1, dominated by, controlled the Economic Warfare Division. Squad 5's majority handled technological infiltration and sabotage. But Squad 7's mixed composition and peacekeeping mission required capabilities that transcended traditional species roles. They would need to think differently than their opponents expected, which was exactly the kind of challenge that had been hopping for. The simulation began with tense negotiations between the various factions. Each squad controlled civilian populations, military forces, and economic assets within the disputed system. Traditional diplomatic solutions had already failed, and military tensions were escalating toward open conflict. Squad 3 immediately deployed their battle fleet to secure key strategic positions, relying on superior firepower to deter aggression. Squad 1 manipulated trade routes and resource prices to pressure opposing factions economically. Squad 5 launched cyber attacks against rival industrial facilities while maintaining plausible deniability. The other squads followed similarly predictable patterns based on their assigned roles and species makeup. Within hours, the simulation had evolved into exactly the kind of complex multi-sided conflict that the real sector crisis had become. Squad 7 watched the developing situation from their command center aboard a massive peacekeeping vessel positioned at the system's center. Their mission parameters gave them authority to intervene militarily, but only to prevent civilian casualties or stop violations of interstellar law. "We're being marginalized," observed with frustration. "The other squads are maneuvering for advantage while we're restricted to reactive measures." "Perhaps that's intentional," suggested. "The scenario may be designed to test our ability to influence events through limited means." 9-Clicks monitored communications between the various factions, his equipment detecting increasingly hostile exchanges. "All participants are preparing for military action. Our intervention authority will activate soon." Mesh and Nexus analyzed the developing strategic situation, their 4 arms working in perfect coordination as they processed massive amounts of tactical data. "Current trajectories indicate system-wide warfare within 12 simulation hours," Nexus reported. "Projected casualties exceed acceptable parameters." Had remained silent during these exchanges, studying not just the immediate tactical situation, but the deeper patterns underlying each squad's behavior. His teammates were focused on their assigned mission, but he was beginning to see possibilities that transcended the simulation's apparent constraints. "What if we're approaching this wrong?" he said quietly. The others turned toward him, remembering how his unconventional thinking had resolved their previous crisis. "Explain," prompted. Gestured toward the holographic display showing fleet movements and diplomatic positions. "Everyone's playing the game according to established rules. Military forces secure territory, economic pressure influences decisions, technological advantages provide tactical benefits. But what if the real solution requires changing the rules themselves? The simulation parameters are fixed, Mesh pointed out. We cannot alter fundamental constraints. We can't alter constraints, agreed, but we can change how we interpret them. Over the next several minutes, outlined an approach that violated every principle of conventional strategic thinking. Instead of using their peacekeeping authority to respond to crises, he suggested creating situations that would require exactly the kind of intervention they were authorized to provide. Rather than accepting their assigned role as neutral mediators, he proposed actively shaping the conflict to serve humanitarian objectives. That's manipulative, Nineclicks observed, his translator struggling with ethical subroutines. It's necessary, replied. Sometimes preventing a larger war requires precipitating smaller conflicts that can be contained and resolved. But the risks, began calculating probabilities and finding disturbing results, are acceptable compared to allowing the situation to escalate naturally, finished. Besides, we're not causing real harm. We're providing controlled releases of tension that prevent more dangerous explosions. The strategy he described was unlike anything taught in academy courses. Standard peacekeeping doctrine emphasized neutrality, mediation, and minimal intervention, was suggesting something that resembled psychological warfare combined with humanitarian intervention, using the other squad's own aggressive instincts against them. It could work, admitted reluctantly, but it requires perfect timing and precise execution. One mistake could make everything worse. Then we don't make mistakes, said simply. Squad 7 spent the next simulation day implementing their unconventional strategy. Instead of waiting for crises to develop naturally, they began subtly influencing events to create controlled confrontations that justified their intervention. When Squad 3's battle fleet moved to secure a mining asteroid, Squad 7's intelligence division leaked information about the asteroid's actual mineral composition to competing factions. The resulting bidding war escalated into armed confrontation that required peacekeeping intervention, which allowed Squad 7 to establish neutral control over the disputed resource. When Squad 1 attempted to manipulate trade routes for economic advantage, Squad 7's diplomatic corps arranged for accidental encounters between rival merchant fleets in contested space. The resulting incidents required neutral arbitration, which gave Squad 7 authority over commercial traffic throughout the system. Each intervention was small and seemingly reactive, but collectively they shifted the entire strategic balance. Rather than allowing the major powers to maneuver for decisive advantages, Squad 7 was forcing them into limited engagements that could be contained and resolved through peacekeeping operations. The other squads began to realize what was happening, but by then it was too late to counter effectively. Their tactical doctrines had no provisions for handling opponents who refused to follow established patterns. Squad 3's battle fleet was formidable, but it couldn't engage targets that wouldn't fight according to conventional parameters. Squad 1's economic warfare was ineffective against opponents who converted economic pressure into opportunities for humanitarian intervention. This is unprecedented, Admiral observed from the simulation control room. The human student has essentially transformed a military exercise into a humanitarian operation. Chief monitored individual performance with growing interest. His tactical thinking operates outside normal parameters. He's not trying to win according to standard victory conditions. He's redefining what victory means. The simulation reached its climax when Squad 5 attempted to seize control of the system's primary space station through cyber warfare and commando infiltration. Their plan was tactically sound and should have succeeded against conventional opposition, but it anticipated exactly this kind of direct action. Instead of defending the station militarily, Squad 7 evacuated all civilian personnel and declared the facility a neutral humanitarian zone under galactic protection laws. When Squad 5's forces arrived, they found themselves in the position of attacking a hospital and refugee center rather than a military target. The action violated so many interstellar laws that it triggered automatic peacekeeping protocols, giving Squad 7 authority to detain the attackers and seize their assets for war crimes compensation. Squad 5 found themselves eliminated from the exercise not through military defeat, but through legal consequences they hadn't anticipated. Similar fates befell the other squads as unconventional approach systematically neutralized their traditional advantages. By the simulation's end, Squad 7 controlled the entire disputed system not through conquest, but through a combination of humanitarian intervention, legal maneuvering, and psychological manipulation that had turned their opponents' own aggressive instincts against them. The debrief session was unlike anything in Academy history. "Explain your strategic reasoning," Admiral requested, though his tone suggested both admiration and concern. Stood before the assembled instructors and cadets, still wearing the same calm expression that had characterized him since arriving at the Academy. The scenario was designed to test conventional military thinking under complex political constraints, but the real challenge wasn't military. It was understanding that some problems can't be solved through traditional approaches. "Your methods were highly irregular," observed Commander, an instructor with decades of experience. "Peacekeeping doctrine does not include psychological manipulation and legal warfare." "Current peacekeeping doctrine," corrected gently. "The galaxy's conflicts are evolving beyond traditional parameters. Future peacekeepers will need capabilities that transcend conventional military thinking." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Wasn't just demonstrating alternative tactics. He was suggesting that fundamental assumptions about galactic conflict might be outdated. If humans could routinely outmaneuver established military doctrines through unconventional thinking, what did that mean for future warfare? "Where did you learn these approaches?" Admiral asked. "Earth's military history suggests limited experience with interstellar conflict." Smiled, and for the first time since arriving at the Academy, his expression held genuine warmth rather than careful politeness. "We learned by fighting ourselves for thousands of years before we ever encountered alien species. Humans have been adapting our tactics to outmaneuver opponents who know our capabilities since before we discovered. We've had a lot of practice thinking differently than our enemies expect." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Every instructor in the room was beginning to realize that their assumptions about human military potential might have been seriously flawed. If one untrained student could systematically defeat experienced cadets from warrior species, what could trained human military units accomplish? But more importantly, if humans thought about conflict in fundamentally different ways than established galactic doctrines assumed, how would that affect the balance of power in future crises? The Academy had prided itself on training the galaxy's finest military minds, using proven methods developed over centuries of experience. Now they faced the possibility that one species might possess capabilities that transcended those traditional approaches entirely. Returned to his quarters that evening as the quiet student he'd always appeared to be, but his instructors now understood that they were dealing with something unprecedented in their experience. A warrior philosopher whose capabilities conventional classification. The galaxy's military establishments would need to be warned that humanity represented a potential paradigm shift in interstellar conflict. Not because humans were more aggressive or better armed than other species, but because they approached warfare from perspectives that existing doctrines couldn't anticipate or counter. The real question was whether the galactic powers would recognize this new reality in time to adapt their own strategies, or whether they would continue underestimating human capabilities until it was too late to respond effectively. News of Squad 7's unprecedented victory spread through the Academy like wildfire, generating discussions that extended far beyond the usual post-exercise analysis. Students from every species found themselves questioning fundamental assumptions about military capability and strategic thinking. The quiet human who had been relegated to logistics support was now the subject of intense scrutiny and speculation. Handled the attention with the same calm demeanor he'd shown since arriving at the Academy, but his daily routine had become significantly more complicated. Fellow cadets approached him constantly, seeking insights into human tactical doctrine or requesting analysis of their own strategic problems. Most of the attention was genuine curiosity, though some carried undertones of challenge from individuals whose species' military reputations had been built over centuries of proven success. The Academy's instructors faced their own dilemma. Standard curriculum was based on well-established principles that had produced competent officers for generations. But its performance suggested that those principles might be incomplete or potentially obsolete when facing opponents who thought about warfare differently than established doctrines assumed. 3 days after the strategic simulation, Admiral announced a special session for all first-year cadets. The auditorium buzzed with speculation as students filed into their assigned seats. Academy announcements outside the normal schedule typically meant either exceptional opportunities or serious problems. Recent exercises have demonstrated capabilities that transcend traditional expectations, the Admiral began without preamble. While this represents valuable learning opportunities, it also raises questions about current training methodologies and strategic assumptions. Felt hundreds of eyes turning toward him, and maintained his neutral expression while listening to the Admiral's carefully worded presentation. Therefore, we are implementing immediate modifications to the standard curriculum. All squads will participate in advanced tactical seminars designed to explore unconventional approaches to military challenges. These sessions will be mandatory and will contribute significantly to your final evaluations. The announcement generated immediate discussion among the cadets. Advanced seminars were typically reserved for final-year students who had demonstrated exceptional aptitude. Requiring first-year participation suggested that the Academy was responding to developments they considered urgent. After the assembly, Squad 7 gathered in their study area to discuss the implications. The space felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of tension that hadn't existed during their earlier collaborative sessions. Success had brought recognition, but it had also made them targets for students who resented having their species' military traditions challenged by someone they'd initially dismissed. "This is unprecedented," observed, reviewing Academy historical records. First-year students have never been required to attend advanced tactical seminars. The curriculum modifications suggest major policy changes at the highest levels. Studied his personal communications device with a troubled expression. "I've received messages from senior cadets expressing concern about human tactical capabilities. Some are questioning whether Earth species should be allowed in command tracks without extensive psychological evaluation." Nine Clicks chittered nervously as he processed similar communications from networks. Significant anxiety registered among multiple species regarding paradigmatic shifts in military doctrine. Request clarification of human strategic objectives within galactic power structures. Looked up from his own device, where he'd been reading increasingly hostile messages from students across multiple species. The Academy's community had been respectful but distant before his demonstration of unconventional capabilities. Now that same community was divided between those seeking to understand human tactical thinking and those viewing it as a potential threat to established order. Perhaps this reaction was inevitable, Mesh suggested with characteristic logic. Revolutionary approaches to established disciplines typically generate resistance from practitioners invested in traditional methods. The resistance might be justified, Nexus added, completing his twin's thought pattern. Humans represent unknown variables in carefully balanced military equations. Uncertainty creates instability. Set aside his communications and looked at each of his in turn. These individuals had become friends over the past months, but he could see growing uncertainty in their expressions. His success had changed how they viewed him, and not necessarily in positive ways. "What do you want to know?" he asked simply. The directness of the question caught them off guard. They'd been discussing him as if he weren't present, analyzing human capabilities like a strategic problem to be solved, rather than acknowledging the person sitting among them. "Are you planning something?" asked bluntly. "The way you think about tactics suggests preparation for specific types of conflict. Military intelligence has documented similar patterns in species that were preparing for expansionist warfare." Consider the question seriously before responding. Every human learns tactics because we're not physically dominant on our own world. We had to develop mental capabilities to survive against stronger, faster, more dangerous species. Those skills transferred to military applications when we encountered alien civilizations. "But your approach to the simulation went beyond survival tactics," pointed out. "You were manipulating the entire strategic framework to achieve objectives that weren't clearly defined in the mission parameters." "Because the mission parameters were based on assumptions that didn't account for human capabilities," replied. "I adapted the objectives to match what we could actually accomplish, rather than accepting limitations imposed by someone else's understanding of our strengths. Nineclicks's translator struggled with emotional nuances as he processed explanation. Clarification requested. Do humans routinely reject authority-imposed limitations in favor of self-determined objectives? The question hung in the air with implications that extended far beyond academic discussions. If humans systematically refused to accept constraints imposed by other species, what did that mean for their integration into galactic civilization? Every successful multi-species organization required participants who could work within established frameworks rather than constantly redefining fundamental assumptions. Realized that his answer would shape not just his own academy experience, but potentially humanity's entire relationship with galactic institutions. We work within legitimate constraints, he said carefully, but we also recognize that some limitations are artificial rather than necessary. When someone tells us something is impossible, we examine whether they're describing actual barriers or just admitting they don't know how to overcome challenges. The distinction was subtle but crucial. Wasn't claiming that humans rejected all authority or constraints, but rather that they questioned whether apparent limitations were real or simply reflections of limited thinking. Before his could respond, their discussion was interrupted by an academy-wide announcement. All first-year cadets report to Battle Simulation Complex 7 immediately, came Admiral's voice over the communication system. This is not a drill. Repeat, all first-year cadets to Battle Simulation Complex 7 for immediate deployment. The urgency in the Admiral's tone sent students hurrying through the Academy's corridors toward the massive simulation complex. Unlike the controlled exercises they'd participated in previously, this felt like a genuine emergency response rather than a training exercise. Battle Simulation Complex 7 was the Academy's most advanced facility, capable of running real-time tactical scenarios using data feeds from actual military operations. It was typically reserved for senior cadets and visiting command staff, not first-year students still learning basic principles. The complex's main chamber could accommodate hundreds of participants simultaneously, with individual command stations arranged around a central holographic display system. Today, the space hummed with activity as technicians prepared equipment and instructors briefed senior staff on rapidly developing situations. Admiral stood at the central command podium, his expression grim as he reviewed incoming intelligence reports. When the last cadets arrived, he addressed the assembled students with military precision. 6 hours ago, long-range sensors detected unidentified vessels entering the Terminus system, approximately 40 light-years from our current position. These ships do not match any known galactic civilization and have ignored all communication attempts. The holographic display activated, showing tactical data that made several cadets gasp in recognition. The unknown vessels were massive, easily dwarfing the largest battleships in the Galactic Defense Fleet. Their technology appeared advanced but alien, utilizing energy signatures that didn't match any documented civilization. Initial contact protocols have failed, the Admiral continued. The unknown fleet has taken position around Terminus Prime, a civilian colony with over 2 million inhabitants. They have not responded to evacuation requests or diplomatic overtures. Studied the tactical display with growing interest. The unknown vessel's positioning and behavior patterns suggested intelligence and purpose rather than random exploration. Someone was making calculated moves for specific objectives, which meant they could potentially be understood and countered. The Galactic Defense Council has authorized military response if diplomatic solutions fail within the next 12 hours, Admiral announced. However, our standard tactical doctrines may be inadequate against opponents utilizing unknown technology and unfamiliar strategic thinking. The implication was clear. The Academy was activating its most advanced simulation systems to test unconventional approaches against an enemy that conventional analysis. And they wanted their students, particularly certain students, to help develop strategies that might save millions of civilian lives. You will be divided into tactical teams with specific analysis assignments, the Admiral continued. Your objective is to model potential engagement scenarios and develop recommendations for military commanders who may face actual combat within hours. The weight of responsibility settled over the assembled cadets like a physical force. This wasn't academic exercise or career preparation anymore. Their analysis might determine whether real military operations succeeded or failed, whether civilian populations survived or perished. Squad 7 found themselves assigned to Strategic Analysis Station 3, equipped with classified intelligence systems and direct communication links to active military units. Their mission was to analyze the unknown fleet's behavior patterns and develop engagement recommendations for unconventional warfare scenarios. Felt a familiar sensation as he reviewed the incoming data, the same focused alertness that had characterized his performance during Academy simulations, but now amplified by the knowledge that real lives hung in the balance. This was exactly the kind of challenge that human tactical thinking was designed to address. The unknown vessels are maintaining perfect formation, observed, analyzing movement patterns with mathematical precision. Their positioning suggests advanced coordination capabilities but also predictable behavior. Studied the tactical projections with professional interest. Standard assault doctrine would focus on their apparent command ship, eliminate central coordination, and the formation should collapse. Analysis indicates sophisticated defensive systems, Mesh reported. Direct assault approaches show minimal success probability against their technological advantages. 9clicks monitored communication intercepts, though the unknown fleet remained silent across all standard frequencies. No intelligence regarding strategic objectives or tactical doctrine. Enemy capabilities remain undefined. Absorbed his analysis while developing his own assessment of the situation. The unknown fleet's behavior showed intelligence and purpose, but their tactics didn't match any documented civilization. That suggested either entirely alien strategic thinking or deliberately deceptive behavior designed to confuse conventional military analysis. Either possibility represented exactly the kind of challenge that human adaptability was meant to address. "We're approaching this wrong," he said quietly, echoing his earlier statement during their peacekeeping simulation. His turned toward him with expressions combining hope and apprehension. His unconventional thinking had resolved their previous crises, but the stakes here were far higher than Academy exercises. "Explain," Admiral requested, appearing suddenly at their station. The senior officer had been monitoring all analysis teams, but's comment had captured his immediate attention. Gestured toward the tactical display showing the mysterious fleet's positions. "Everyone's analyzing them as if they're following some kind of military doctrine we just haven't identified yet. But what if they're not military at all?" "The vessels are clearly armed and positioned for combat," pointed out. "Their behavior indicates hostile intent." "Their behavior indicates preparation for confrontation," corrected. "But preparation doesn't necessarily mean aggression. Sometimes it means fear." The distinction sparked immediate debate among his and attracted attention from nearby analysis teams. Was suggesting that the unknown fleet might be responding defensively to perceived threats rather than implementing aggressive conquest plans. "Elaborate on your assessment," Admiral ordered, his tone carrying the authority of someone whose decisions might determine the fate of entire star systems. Studied the tactical data one more time before presenting his analysis. "The fleet's positioning is perfect for defense but poor for offense. They're protecting the civilian colony rather than threatening it. Their silence suggests either inability to communicate in our languages or fear that communication might be interpreted as aggression." He paused, allowing the implications to settle before continuing. "What if they're not invaders at all? What if they're refugees fleeing something even more dangerous, and they've chosen Terminus Prime as a sanctuary because it's far enough from galactic civilization to offer protection from whatever they're running from?" The hypothesis transformed the entire strategic analysis. If the unknown fleet represented refugees rather than invaders, then military action might precipitate exactly the kind of humanitarian crisis that galactic civilization was designed to prevent. But if was wrong, and the fleet represented hostile forces utilizing deceptive tactics, then delayed military response could result in the loss of millions of civilian lives. Admiral faced a decision that would define his career and potentially alter the balance of power throughout the galaxy. And he was being advised by a first-year cadet whose species had been part of galactic civilization for less than a decade. "How do we test your hypothesis?" the Admiral asked. Smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, his expression held confidence rather than uncertainty. "We do what humans do best. We try something nobody expects and see what happens." The tactical approach he outlined was unlike anything in established military doctrine. Instead of preparing for battle or attempting conventional diplomatic contact, he suggested something that transcended traditional categories entirely: a demonstration of intent that would allow the unknown fleet to reveal their true objectives without forcing them into defensive positions. "That's either brilliant or insane," Admiral observed after reviewing his proposal. Both agreed, but it's also our best chance of resolving this crisis without unnecessary casualties on either side. The Admiral studied the young human who had systematically challenged every assumption about warfare, strategy, and relations since arriving at the Academy. Represented something unprecedented in galactic military history: a tactical thinker whose approaches transcended conventional categories while maintaining focus on humanitarian objectives. If his assessment of the Terminus system situation was correct, then following his recommendations might prevent a catastrophic misunderstanding between galactic civilization and unknown, but potentially friendly forces. If he was wrong, then millions of people might die, because a senior military officer chose to trust unconventional thinking over proven doctrine. Admiral looked around the simulation complex at hundreds of cadets and instructors working to develop strategies for the crisis. Centuries of military tradition and established tactical doctrine were represented in that room, along with the finest strategic minds from dozens of species. But only one individual had demonstrated the ability to think beyond conventional parameters when facing unprecedented challenges. "Prepare implementation protocols for the human students' recommendations," Admiral ordered, "and establish direct communication links with Fleet Command. We're about to find out whether human tactical thinking can prevent interstellar warfare." The next few hours would determine not just the fate of Terminus Prime's civilian population, but humanity's role in galactic military affairs for generations to come. The communication with Fleet Command established a direct link between the Academy's simulation complex and Admiral's flagship, the Galactic Sovereign, currently positioned 3 light-years from the Terminus system. The elderly commander's reputation for tactical brilliance was legendary throughout the galaxy, but even his extensive experience had never prepared him for the current crisis. "Admiral, we have strategic recommendations from the Academy analysis team," came the transmission from Admiral. "The proposals are unconventional, but may offer alternatives to direct military engagement." Admiral studied the tactical displays surrounding his command chair, where dozens of his most experienced officers analyzed every aspect of the unknown fleet. Standard military doctrine provided clear guidelines for responding to hostile forces, but the mysterious vessel's behavior patterns conventional classification. "Present your recommendations," Admiral ordered, though his tone suggested skepticism about advice from Academy students. Admiral activated the communication link that connected directly to the fleet commander. The young human found himself addressing one of the galaxy's most respected military leaders, while surrounded by hundreds of cadets and instructors who were watching his every word. "Admiral, I believe the unknown fleet represents refugees rather than invaders," began without preamble. "Their positioning and behavior suggest defensive positioning around a perceived sanctuary rather than preparation for aggressive action." The communication channel remained silent for several moments as Admiral processed this assessment. His decades of combat experience had taught him to evaluate threats based on capability rather than assumed intent, and the unknown fleet clearly possessed the capability to devastate any opposition. "Explain your reasoning, Cadet," the Admiral finally responded. Activated the holographic display at his station, sharing his analysis with both the Academy audience and the fleet command staff. "The unknown vessels are maintaining perfect defensive positions around Terminus Prime, but those same positions would be strategically poor for offensive operations. Their formation protects the colony rather than threatening it." He highlighted specific positioning patterns that supported his hypothesis. Additionally, They've made no attempt to establish orbital bombardment positions or deploy ground forces. If conquest was their objective, they would have secured military control immediately rather than maintaining standoff distances. Admiral's strategic staff reviewed Sanalysis while maintaining their own preparations for combat operations. The humans' logic was sound, but experience had taught them that even defensive positioning could transition rapidly to offensive action. Your assessment assumes benevolent intent, Admiral observed. Military history demonstrates that apparent defensive behavior often masks preparation for surprise attacks. Agreed, replied. Which is why I recommend a test that will reveal their true intentions without precipitating unnecessary conflict. The strategy he outlined challenged every principle of conventional first contact protocols. Instead of maintaining distance while demanding communication or approaching with overwhelming force to discourage aggression, suggested something unprecedented, a deliberate demonstration of vulnerability that would allow the unknown fleet to reveal their actual objectives. You're proposing that we deliberately expose civilian populations to potential attack, Admiral said bluntly. That violates fundamental military doctrine. I'm proposing that we offer them exactly what they appear to want, sanctuary for refugees fleeing unknown dangers, corrected. If they're hostile, they'll attack immediately. If they're refugees, they'll accept assistance and reveal their situation. The communication channel carried heated discussions from Admiral's staff as they debated the merits and risks of his proposal. Traditional military thinking emphasized force protection and overwhelming advantage when dealing with unknown threats. The human student was suggesting precisely the opposite approach. But Admiral had witnessed tactical thinking during Academy simulations, and he understood that conventional approaches might be inadequate for unprecedented situations. Admiral, the human student, has demonstrated exceptional capability for unconventional problem-solving, Admiral interjected. His methods have proven effective in scenarios where traditional approaches failed. Academy simulations and actual military operations involve different stakes, Admiral replied grimly. Experimental tactics that fail in training exercises result in poor grades. Experimental tactics that fail in combat result in massive casualties. Understood the Admiral's reluctance, but he also recognized that conventional military responses might precipitate exactly the kind of catastrophe they were trying to prevent. If the unknown fleet represented refugees fleeing some greater threat, then attacking them would constitute one of the greatest humanitarian disasters in galactic history. Admiral, request permission to present additional analysis, said formally. Granted. Activated new displays showing communication intercept data that his had compiled during their analysis. The unknown fleet has not responded to our communication attempts, but they have been monitoring our transmissions. Signal analysis indicates sophisticated translation capabilities, which means they understand our languages but choose not to respond. He highlighted specific patterns in the electromagnetic spectrum around the unknown vessels. Additionally, their ships show signs of recent damage consistent with combat operations, but the damage patterns don't match any known galactic weapon systems. They've been fighting someone else, using technology we haven't encountered. The implications were clear. If the unknown fleet had been engaged in combat with forces utilizing unfamiliar technology, then they represented survivors of conflicts that galactic civilization knew nothing about. Attacking them might eliminate valuable intelligence about potential threats while simultaneously destroying potential allies. Your analysis suggests larger strategic implications, Admiral acknowledged, but it doesn't change the immediate risk to civilian populations. Actually, it does, replied. If they're refugees from unknown conflicts, then they possess information about threats that galactic civilization hasn't encountered. That intelligence could be crucial for future defense planning. Paused before delivering his most important point. And if they're running from something dangerous enough to force them to flee to the galactic frontier, then we need to know what that threat might be. The communication channel carried another round of heated discussions as Admiral's staff weighed the strategic implications of analysis. The possibility that unknown threats existed beyond current galactic borders represented a paradigm shift in military planning that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. Admiral made his decision with the authority of someone accustomed to bearing responsibility for millions of lives. Very well, Cadet. We will implement a modified version of your recommendations. But if your assessment proves incorrect, the consequences will be severe. The strategy that emerged combines unconventional approach with Admiral's extensive combat experience. Instead of approaching the unknown fleet with overwhelming force or maintaining hostile standoff positions, the Galactic Defense Forces would offer humanitarian assistance while maintaining defensive readiness. A single cruiser, the Harmony's Voice, would approach Terminus Prime under flags of truce and medical assistance. The vessel would broadcast offers of supply, medical aid, and communication support in every known language, while deliberately exposing itself to potential attack to demonstrate peaceful intentions. If the unknown fleet responded aggressively, Admiral's main battle group would implement overwhelming retaliation. If they responded positively, diplomatic protocols would begin immediately. But the critical element was insight that apparent defensive behavior might actually represent desperate refugees seeking sanctuary rather than hostile forces preparing for conquest. The Harmony's Voice began its approach toward Terminus Prime, while Admiral's fleet maintained battle readiness from concealed positions. Watched the tactical displays with growing tension as the cruiser moved slowly through the unknown fleet's defensive perimeter. For several minutes, nothing happened. The mysterious vessels maintained their positions without acknowledgement or response, their silence creating mounting anxiety among everyone monitoring the situation. Then the communication channels activated. The transmission was unlike anything in galactic communication history. Instead of standard diplomatic protocols or military challenges, the unknown fleet broadcast something that transcended language barriers entirely. Mathematical sequences that described their situation with precision that surpassed verbal communication. Recognized the patterns immediately. The unknown fleet was using mathematical metaphors to describe refugee populations fleeing destruction, seeking sanctuary, and requesting assistance for survival. But embedded within those same equations were warnings about pursuing threats that posed dangers to galactic civilization itself. "They're not just refugees," he announced to the Academy simulation complex. "They're advanced scouts warning us about something that's coming." The mathematical transmissions continued for over an hour, describing civilizations beyond current galactic borders that had fallen to unknown aggressors. The refugee fleet represented survivors from multiple species that had been forced to flee their home systems when faced with overwhelming destructive forces. But most importantly, they brought intelligence about the aggressors who were systematically conquering everything in their path, moving steadily toward galactic civilization's outer territories. "Admiral, recommend immediate diplomatic contact," Admiral transmitted. "The refugee fleet possesses critical intelligence about potential invasion forces." The first formal communication between galactic civilization and the refugee fleet took place 6 hours later, mediated by translation systems that converted mathematical concepts into understandable language. What emerged was a story that challenged every assumption about galactic security and strategic planning. The refugees represented survivors from dozens of species whose civilizations had been destroyed by forces they called the Devourers, entities that consumed entire star systems while converting organic matter into components for self-replicating mechanical armies. The refugee fleet had been fleeing for over a year, seeking sanctuary far enough from their original territories to offer temporary safety. But the Devourers were following the refugee trail, systematically eliminating evidence of their own advance while preparing for expansion into new territories. According to the refugees' intelligence, galactic civilization had perhaps 6 months before the first Devourer scouts reached the outer colonies. The strategic implications were staggering. Galactic defense forces had been preparing for conflicts with known civilizations using familiar technologies and conventional tactics. The Devourers represented threats that operated outside every established parameter, utilizing capabilities that conventional military doctrine couldn't address. Listened to the intelligence briefings with growing understanding of what had brought him to this moment. The Academy had challenged him to think beyond conventional approaches, because conventional approaches would be inadequate for the challenges humanity and galactic civilization were about to face. Admiral recommend establishing joint command structure with refugee fleet leadership, transmitted during a break in the diplomatic sessions. Their combat experience against Devourer forces represents our best intelligence source for developing effective countermeasures. The recommendation sparked immediate debate among military leadership. Integrating unknown alien forces into galactic command structures violated established security protocols and risked compromising defensive capabilities. But the alternative was facing unprecedented threats without access to the only intelligence sources that had survived previous encounters. Admiral weighed the risks against the potential benefits while reviewing tactical analysis. The young human had demonstrated exceptional capability for unconventional problem-solving, but this recommendation would shape galactic military policy for the foreseeable future. Cadet, your assessment has proven accurate regarding the refugee fleet's nature and objectives, Admiral acknowledged. But integration of unknown forces raises security concerns that extend beyond immediate tactical considerations. Understood, replied. But conventional security measures assume conventional threats. The Devourers represent something entirely different, which means our response must be different as well. The statement encapsulated everything that made human tactical thinking unique within galactic civilization. While other species refined their approaches within established parameters, humans questioned whether those parameters remained valid when facing unprecedented challenges. Admiral watched address galactic military leadership with the same calm confidence he'd shown during academy exercises. But now, the stakes extended far beyond academic success or career advancement. The young human's recommendations might determine whether galactic civilization survived the coming confrontation. Admiral, request permission to present comprehensive strategic analysis for long-term threat response, transmitted. Granted. The strategy that outlined over the next hour represented a fusion of human adaptability, refugee intelligence, and galactic military capabilities that transcended conventional approach categories. Instead of preparing for defensive warfare using established tactics, he proposed something unprecedented, transforming galactic civilization's entire military paradigm to address threats that operated outside known parameters. The plan was ambitious beyond anything previously attempted, requiring coordination between dozens of species with different capabilities, tactical doctrines, and strategic objectives. But it also offered the possibility of not just surviving the Devourer invasion, but developing capabilities that would ensure galactic security for generations to come. Admiral studied comprehensive analysis while considering the implications for galactic military policy. The human student had systematically challenged every assumption about warfare since arriving at the academy, demonstrating capabilities that conventional classification. Now he was proposing to restructure galactic defense policy to address threats that conventional wisdom suggested were impossible to counter. Your proposal requires unprecedented cooperation between galactic military forces and unknown alien refugees, Admiral observed. The political implications alone could destabilize current alliance structures. Yes, agreed simply. But the alternative is facing extinction-level threats with inadequate preparation and limited intelligence. The choice was stark: maintain conventional approaches while facing unconventional threats, or accept revolutionary changes that offered the possibility of survival at the cost of disrupting established order. Admiral made his decision with the authority of someone whose responsibility extended to the survival of galactic civilization itself. Implement preliminary phases of the human student's recommendations, and establish permanent communication links with Academy tactical analysis teams. We're going to need unconventional thinking for what's coming. Felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical force. His tactical analysis had just become the foundation for galactic military policy during the greatest crisis in recorded history. But he also felt a familiar sense of anticipation, the same alertness that characterized human responses to unprecedented challenges. The Devourers represented exactly the kind of adaptive threat that human tactical thinking had evolved to address. And galactic civilization was about to discover what humans could accomplish when given adequate resources and clear objectives. The real war was about to begin. 6 months later, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Galactic Defense Institute, once a prestigious academy for training conventional military officers, had become the central hub for developing entirely new approaches to interstellar warfare. The refugee fleet's intelligence about devourer capabilities had revolutionized every aspect of military planning. But the most significant change was humanity's emergence as the galaxy's primary source of innovative tactical doctrine. Stood in the Academy's main strategic planning center, no longer a first-year cadet, but serving as special advisor for unconventional warfare development. The promotion was unprecedented in Academy history, but then again, everything about the current crisis precedent. His former had been assigned to specialized units based on their species' traditional capabilities, but they remained part of his core planning team. The strategic displays surrounding the planning center showed the current tactical situation across the galaxy's outer territories. Devourer scout forces had been detected approaching 3 different star systems, their mechanical armies systematically consuming everything they encountered while gathering intelligence about galactic defensive capabilities. Traditional military responses had proven completely inadequate. Battle fleets, tactical coordination, technological advantages, and communication networks had all failed against enemies that operated outside conventional parameters. The Devourers absorbed energy weapons, adapted to defensive formations, and converted captured technology into components for their ever-expanding mechanical armies. But human tactical thinking was beginning to show promising results. Status report on Operation Labyrinth. Requested, reviewing data from the first major engagement between galactic forces and Devourer advance elements. Now serving as strategic analysis coordinator, provided the briefing with mathematical precision. Calculations confirm 73% effectiveness for asymmetric engagement protocols. Devourer adaptation rates remain within acceptable parameters when facing unpredictable tactical sequences. The operation had been based on insight that the Devourer's primary advantage was their ability to analyze and counter conventional military approaches. By implementing deliberately irrational tactical sequences that changed randomly throughout engagement, human-trained units could maintain effectiveness against enemies that should have been able to adapt to any consistent pattern. Commanding the 1st Integrated Combat Brigade added his perspective from ground operations. Forces report successful implementation of persistence predator tactics. Instead of decisive engagement, we maintained pressure over extended periods until Devourer units experienced resource depletion. The strategy violated every principle of conventional warfare that emphasized achieving victory through overwhelming force application. Instead, human doctrine focused on wearing down enemies through sustained pressure that prevented them from consolidating resources or adapting to consistent threats. 9-Click's managed communication networks that connected dozens of species in real-time tactical coordination. Communication protocols successfully integrated with human unpredictability algorithms. Network adaptation rates exceed previous benchmarks for multi-species coordination efficiency. The technological integration had been one of the most challenging aspects of implementing human tactical doctrine on a galactic scale. Each species' communication systems had evolved to support their traditional military approaches, but human methods required constant adaptation and real-time modification of established patterns. Mesh and Nexus, working as technological integration specialists, provided updates on equipment modifications. Engineering Core reports successful deployment of modular weapon systems designed for rapid reconfiguration. Equipment adaptation cycles reduced from standard intervals to continuous modification protocols. The equipment changes represented a fundamental shift in galactic military philosophy. Instead of perfecting standardized systems through incremental improvement, human doctrine emphasized developing capabilities that could be modified constantly to maintain unpredictability against adaptive enemies. Absorbed the reports while monitoring real-time intelligence from active combat zones. The war against the Devourers had already lasted longer than anyone had expected, but galactic forces were beginning to demonstrate capabilities that even the refugee fleet hadn't thought possible. Incoming priority transmission from Admiral, announced the communication center. The elderly commander appeared on the main display, broadcasting from his flagship deep within Devourer territory. The background showed the aftermath of a major engagement, with debris fields and energy discharges that to the intensity of recent combat. Strategic Command, reporting successful completion of Operation Cascade, Admiral announced with visible satisfaction. Devourer main battle group eliminated using human-designed sequential adaptation protocols. Enemy forces could not maintain effectiveness against continuously evolving tactical parameters. The victory represented more than just military success. For the first time since the crisis began, Galactic forces had achieved decisive victory against Devourer main battle formations, rather than just surviving encounters with scout units. Studied the tactical data streaming from Admiral's engagement, noting patterns that confirmed his theoretical predictions about Devourer vulnerabilities. The mechanical armies were extremely effective against conventional military doctrine, but they struggled against opponents who refused to follow consistent patterns. Admiral requests detailed analysis of Devourer adaptation attempts during the engagement, transmitted. They tried to counter our tactics approximately every 15 minutes, Admiral replied. But each adaptation attempt triggered automatic modification of our tactical parameters. By the end of the engagement, they were responding to patterns that no longer existed while we were implementing approaches they had never encountered. The success had been achieved through what called tactical chaos theory, creating military systems that appeared random but actually followed complex patterns that could be modified faster than enemies could analyze and counter them. It was the ultimate expression of human adaptability applied to large-scale warfare. But the victory also highlighted growing tensions within galactic civilization itself. Admiral were receiving protests from the Galactic Military Council regarding human tactical doctrine implementation, Admiral reported. Several species are expressing concerns about abandoning proven military traditions in favor of experimental approaches. The resistance was understandable but potentially catastrophic. Many species had built their entire military identities around tactical approaches that had proven successful for thousands of years. Accepting that those approaches were inadequate against new threats required psychological adjustments that extended beyond simple strategic modifications. "What specific concerns are they raising?" asked. Admiral activated communications from various galactic military leaders, displaying formal complaints that had been submitted to the Military Council over the past few weeks. The High Command expresses concern that human tactical doctrine undermines warrior discipline and battlefield honor, he began reading. Strategic Planning Division argues that mathematical tactical principles are being replaced by irrational methodologies that cannot be properly analyzed or taught. More complaints followed from other species. Engineering Corps worried that constantly modifying equipment prevented proper testing and quality assurance. Communication networks struggled with coordination protocols that changed too rapidly for their consensus-based decision-making processes. Listened to each concern with the same careful attention he'd given to military intelligence during the crisis. These weren't just bureaucratic complaints. They represented fundamental challenges to implementing human tactical doctrine across galactic civilization. All valid concerns, he acknowledged when Admiral finished reading, but they're also missing the critical point about adaptive warfare. Activated his own tactical displays, showing historical data from engagements between galactic forces and Devourer units over the past 6 months. Every species' traditional military doctrine worked perfectly until they encountered enemies that operated outside established parameters, he explained. Warrior discipline was flawless against conventional opponents. Mathematical analysis was extraordinarily effective for predictable tactical scenarios, but the Devourers represent something different. The displays showed engagement results comparing conventional tactics versus human-inspired adaptive approaches. The difference was stark. Conventional methods resulted in consistent failure against Devourer forces, while adaptive methods achieved success rates that increased over time as galactic forces became more